Hi, I'm Dr. Kyle Kairos, and I'm here to talk to you about optimizing milk production in Hawaii's beef cattle herds. To put things in context, the world population continues to grow with an estimate of around 10.5 billion people by 2050. We'll have less resources and more people to feed. So, how do we meet these food demands? Well, we're going to have to lower production costs, find new ways to produce more with less, and if we want to be rewarded, increase quality. And as industries become more consolidated, I believe that'll be more of a critical factor. Improving yields has been a major focus of animal industries over the last 50 to 100 years. The dairy industry is seeing milk production at all-time highs. Pigs are growing faster, staying leaner longer than perhaps they've ever been, while also improving their quality. And egg production and broiler production um, has also seen huge increases in terms of overall production. And we know that the traits that we measure or observe is the phenotype. And in order to get that phenotype, we have a combination of genetic and environmental or management effects that must be considered. Sometimes, though, production doesn't always equal profit, and that'll be a theme we discussed today. So as I mentioned, phenotype is a combination of both genetic and environmental factors. And in beef cattle production, environment has limited genetic potential for a variety of traits. Compared to the previous industries I described that are more intensive, beef cattle production often occurs in an extensive environment where Mother Nature has a lot of control. Environmental factors including climate and rainfall, the availability of grass, those go hand in hand, supplemental feeding, forage quality, mineral nutrition, parasite control, animal health, amongst many other factors, all tend to limit the expression of genetic potential for various traits. So when we talk about phenotype, we have to realize environment and management contribute greatly along with genetics. Our topic today will focus mainly around genetics. Shown here is a picture of the US map with the different states represented. And we have bulls coming from different parts of the country that we're going to go ahead and use as an example. We have to expect there to be differences between animal performance in each of these environments. And when we take those genetics and we bring them to Hawaii, sometimes harmony is not achieved. More often than not, that's the case. So on Maui, within the county, we have a variety of microclimates, perhaps not shown any better than here, where each dot represents something tremendously different, whether it be rainfall or soil type. And we have to try and get our genetics to match our environment and our management. When discussing economically relevant traits in beef herds, two traits come to mind in many conversations with cattlemen: pounds on the ground, or weaning weights, and fertility, or the importance of cows that breed back on time, always come up. Sometimes carcass traits are mentioned, and they're important too. But overall, cattlemen have recognized weaning weights and fertility as being primary profit drivers for their operations. A variety of selection tools has allowed for the increased selection pressure on weaning weights, and guess what? Cattle have gotten bigger over the last 50 years. We do have larger weaning weights. But sometimes those selection tools can lead us astray. Weaning weight is a combination of both growth and milk production from the dam, and we're going to focus on milk production in today's talk. When cattlemen talk about milk production, they're usually in the presence of cattle they're evaluating. Is she a good milker? Well, here we have a Brangus female, a stout 7-year-old that's wide-chested, big-bodied, got a lot of rib, got a lot of power, nice udder structure. For a 2013 model, her udder is still above her hocks, and she's put it into her calf. I mean, that's a whopper, and he's going to push the scales down at weaning. She'd probably be considered a good milker and one with superior growth traits. Here we have a Hereford Cow calf pair. A little more moderation in frame with the cow, wide chested, bold sprung, a ton of rib, very easy fleshing. She's an 11-year-old. That bag still looks fairly tidy, although it has dropped a little bit over time. She's got a bull calf that's obviously gained well on grass and mama's milk. Very practical female that's raised her calf and maintained her flesh. Both of these are aged cows that have found the way to produce high, breed back in their environment. Here we have another example of a larger framed Angus Cross Cow. She's a high milk production female with a track record of producing really big, awesome calves for the breeder. That increased mature weight compared to her contemporaries comes with a cost. She does eat more. She's a high milk production cow, like I mentioned, so her net energy required for lactation is also higher. And while her calves may do awesome in terms of gain, they also are going to have increased maintenance requirements as well, especially if a daughter is kept back in the herd. Is she without value? No. When bred strategically, this cow may be ideal for the production of a terminal sire prospect, meaning a bull that can go out and sire calves that are destined for the food chain. But in this case, just because she's high milk doesn't mean she's maternal in this environment, because at the age of 5, after producing 3 calves, she didn't breed back. She failed that test. So when we talk about production and we try and compare it to profit, sometimes the two don't equal each other. Here it's worth mentioning that the heifer calf pictured is the product of a strategic mating to that cow to a bull with a more moderate profile for mature weight and milk production. That bull is also very accelerated in his genetic predictors for carcass traits. So while Aloha may mean goodbye for her mother, she's got time to play and make a contribution to this herd moving forward. Here we have an example of a young Red Angus female. This is a first calf heifer of medium frame. She's still growing like other first calf heifers, which makes them the hardest working females in the business, having to juggle the demands of lactation, maintenance, and growth. And she has an above average genetic potential for milk, and she certainly appears to be on track to produce calves with average to above average performance. She's of medium frame, so we expect her to be about average in terms of her requirements at maturity. She's got slightly above average production for milk, so she's probably going to have a slightly higher maintenance energy requirement. And so will her calves if they have increased performance. But more importantly than anything else, is she profitable or not? Well, so far, so good. She's bred back. And while this is very important, we don't know much in terms of the long-term profit of this female based on her own individual performance yet. If she breeds back another 8 times, and at the age of 10 has raised and weaned 8 calves of average to above average quality, then yeah, for sure, we'll definitely say that the production amounts to profit. It's also important to note that this heifer's mother is currently 9 years old, still active. Her dam's dam was a twin and was sold at the age of 16 as a bred just to make room for some of the new heifers. The twin to her dam's dam produced until she was 17, and then moved last year in 2019. So she's got a performance pedigree for longevity, and she appears to be off to a good start. But we don't know until she proves herself, year in and year out, in good times and bad. It's clear that the Red Angus female in the last slide has invested greatly in her calf. She's trim and she's leaned up quite a bit, but she did rebreed, which is ultimately what we want. But there is a strong relationship between a cow's nutritional status and reproductive cyclicity. We typically measure a cow's nutritional status by the amount of body condition or fat reserve she's carrying. Here we have a graph from a classical dairy science paper with the percentage of anovular or non-cycling cows on the y-axis and the body condition scores of those females on the x-axis. The open circles are first calf heifers, the closed circles are mature cows, and these measurements were taken 47 to 53 days after calving. It's pretty clear that you need to get cattle in a body condition score of at least 3 1/4 in order to have good reproductive success. To maintain a 365-day calving interval, here we have a female in a body condition score of 3, and while 3 1/4 should be a absolute minimum target, a body condition score of 4 is more desired, especially between 40 and 50 days rebreeding, adding another 21 days, the typical length of an estrus cycle. That keeps you under 83 days, so you can maintain a 365-day calving interval, assuming she takes on that service. Quite simply, you have to feed them in order to breed them. Grazing management is very important, and some people are able to do a little bit more than others, depending on their either grazing management or supplemental feeding strategy. What do all of these cows have in common? It's certainly not breed. We have Angus, we have Brangus, we have Ultra Blacks, we have Herefords, we have Red Angus, we even have Sim Angus shown here. And they're from all different parts of the country, including Maui, Kauai, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Wyoming, Montana, and even Georgia. What do all these cows have in common? Well, they've all passed the test. They've all produced at least 8 calves, made it to age 10 without missing a beat. They've never screwed up. If you look and you study these animals closely in terms of visual appraisal, you'll find that many of these females tend to be problem-free, and their genetic potential matches the environment in which they're expected to perform. So why are we talking about milk in the first place? Well, I became a little concerned because we have a lot of herds here in Hawaii that I've visited, both on Maui and on other counties, that have really great management. Their grazing management is good. Their animal health management is great. They're using modified live vaccination protocols to protect their cow herd and immunize them against various threats. But we have a lot of people who have an 85% pregnancy rate, despite seemingly doing many things right. Could it be that genetics aren't in sync with the environment? Well, we don't know. So I collected samples from over 20 herds across the state of Hawaii and sent those samples off for genomic analysis. My goal was to determine the current levels of production for various traits of economic importance. One of the surprising findings pertains to milk production levels, and that data is shown in the graph below, with the y-axis representing the percentage of animals and the x-axis representing the genomic scores. In this case, a genomic score of 10 indicates extremely high levels of milk production. A genomic score of 1 indicates extremely low levels of milk production. A genomic score of 5 is the average milk production expected across all breeds of cattle. This is a multi-breed panel, so we're comparing breed to breed, apples to oranges, in a productive manner. One surprising thing is more than 50% of the cattle we tested in Hawaii are over a 6 for milk. And this is quite concerning because most of the forages we have in the state are typically warm season C4 grasses that have high lignification and lack the nutrient density that some of our counterparts in the mainland may benefit from. So this is a telltale sign that there may be more milk production than the environment in which many of our ranches are operating in. What does this mean? Well, we have cows that have higher maintenance energy requirements than perhaps the outputs that are even attainable on that ranch land. So how did we get here? Well, there's a plethora of selection tools available, and as I've mentioned, there's been a lot of pressure to increase weaning weights, both through selection for growth and in terms of selecting to improve milk production. And don't get me wrong, milk and growth aren't bad things if your input costs and your nutrient availability are favorable. I'm not suggesting this is the way cattlemen in the Midwest and Iowa should be raising their cattle, but this presentation is focused on cattle raising in Hawaii's rangeland environments. So how do we get here? Let's look at some genetic trends. So this is data from the Angus Herd Improvement Records division of the American Angus Association, and as you can see, in 1972 the genetic trend for milk was near a 6, and over the next 30 to 40 years there's an upward trend in terms of milk levels. Cattle produce more milk than they ever did before. If we take a closer look at 2019 in the top 25 sires for registrations, you could probably conclude that this trend will continue for years to come. Each dot representing one of the sires on that top 25 registration list. So these are the sires that are probably going to contribute the most genetics to offspring moving forward for at least the next year or 2 years. As we change our focus to weaning weights and look at that genetic trend, we've seen also significant progress in purebred herds for weaning weight. And as you would expect, you have a tool, you use that tool, you put more selection pressure on improving weaning weights, and that's what you get. So it's pretty clear we've made cattle bigger at weaning around 205 days, and likewise you could expect in a correlated response to selection, we've also made cattle bigger at 365 days or at yearling age. What are some other correlated responses? We've made them bigger at weaning, we've made them bigger at yearling. Let's look at mature weights, and as you'd expect, the same thing. The genetic trend for mature weights have increased, and when you actually look at recorded cow weights over time, you can actually determine that yes, in fact, mature cow size has also increased quite significantly since 1972. Okay, and this is a trend that you'll see not only in Angus but in other breeds. And as we've talked about weight and size, what comes with an increased mature size? Well, increased energy costs associated with maintaining that cow. If we take a quick look at Red Angus, which is known for maternal ability, with a breed association that was the first to include stayability as a genetic estimate of reproductive success in their genetic evaluation. We see that over time, from the 1950s to now, there has been an increase in maintenance energy requirements, and as you'd expect in a maternally focused breed with maternally focused breeders around the mid-2000s, those individuals recognize that yes, cow size and cow costs may have been getting a little bit out of balance, and ever since then there's been sort of a plateau in terms of maintenance energy requirements, at least from a genetic predictor's standpoint. So again, when we talk about cow herd profitability, again, put all this information I just presented in context. We have weaning weights on one end, and while pounds in the ground is important, fertility in cows that breed back are even more important for our long-term profitability. All of those things depend on the availability of feed resources, and as we start pushing the needle towards more growth and more milk, we will get increased weaning weights, we'll make the cows bigger. But when Mother Nature throws us a curveball with no rainfall or drought conditions, sometimes our feed resources aren't there. We can't support that additional size, production, and fertility becomes affected. And now we have a real problem. So as we leave the seed stock world and look at what's happening in commercial herds, here we have weaning weight data obtained from 2003 to 2018 as part of the Cow Herd Appraisal Performance Software CHAPS program. It's pretty clear that with weaning weights on the y-axis and the year the measurements were taken on the x-axis, that weaning weights have stalled in America's commercial cow herds. In fact, steer weights have remained stable around 560 pounds. Why is this happening? Well, we've been selecting for improved genetics for growth and improved milk in our cow herds without any increase in weaning weights. How could this be happening? Well, when it comes to milk, some people have suggested that the calves may not be able to utilize that extra milk produced from their dams. And while that might be part of it, it's probably more related to the fact that the environment in which those cows are producing in can't support their genetic potential to reach that higher level of milk production in the first place anyway. With that data, why would this be concerning to us? Well, we've made cows bigger, we've increased their potential to produce milk, and we pay a cost for that increased production, but we don't appear to be getting anything, any return on that investment. So this is a problem. And if weaning weights have stalled in the continental U.S., especially in the northern plains, sandhills of Nebraska, and throughout the Midwest, in those environments where that grass packs a big nutritional punch, what's happening here in Hawaii with our subtropical forage base? That's a good question. If we think back to the audit of over 20 beef herds across the state of Hawaii and we look at those numbers, we typically don't have the feed resources or the feed cost structure in order to support, in many environments, milk production that's slightly above average or greater. So we may have overshot our target, gone overkill in the selection for certain traits, in this case milk, that may be detrimental to our long-term profitability. Our goals are to match production levels to the environment and management that we operate in. A simple graphic here shows input costs on one side and output value on the other. And while we realize a variety of factors can influence our inputs and outputs, as long as those things line up, we can break even. Hopefully we do better than break even. In agriculture, it's tough already, right? I wanted to use a quick little example of corn production without getting into a huge enterprise budget to calculate costs. Here we have a graph with the extra bushels of corn produced on the y-axis and the extra pounds of nitrogen applied per acre on the x-axis. As you can see, the cost for that extra nitrogen is in a rather straight line, and if we look at the yield chart, after a period of time there are some diminishing returns in terms of that extra cost. So in many cases, chasing extra production may not always pencil. Delving deeper into that example, let's look at a case study with a 220-acre corn farm. Farm A, its manager is going to target a 350 bushel per acre yield, and Farm B, that manager is going to target 180 bushel per acre yield. The input cost to achieve those levels is $1,150 per acre for the 350 bushel per acre yield, and it's $525 an acre for the 180 bushel per acre yield. So, what is your goal? Like, how high is your target? It probably ought to be where you're going to make the most profit. The corn price today happened to be $3.69 per bushel. If you do the math, the total input cost for Farm A is $253,000 on that 220 acres, whereas it's $115,500 for the farm targeting a lower yield. If you look at the yield estimates, Farm A has produced 73,500 bushels, whereas Farm B has produced 37,800 bushels. The gross value of that production is much higher in Farm A, $271 and some change in farm gate value, and it's $139,482 for Farm B. But who made more net return? Well, if we look at the cost versus the yield, Farm A that chased that high level of production returned $18,215. Divide that by the acreage under production, and that's an $82.80 profit per acre. Whereas Farm B had a net return of $23,982 with a net return of $109 more or less per acre. Production doesn't always equal profit, guys, and the same is the case for corn. May translate to cattle or other enterprises. So sometimes you have to ask yourself, do you want to chase the unicorn and the high production and be able to brag to your friends at the feed store, or in this case the grain elevator? Or do you want to have a little extra money in your pocket, pay off debt, go on vacation, send your kids to college? Sometimes chasing production doesn't always equal profit. So is this always going to be the case? Are you always going to chase lower production? Well, as long as corn price is at $3.70 a bushel, yeah, I mean you need to stay in business. But what's to say that in 5 years corn price couldn't jump up to $7 a bushel? In that case, you're dealing with a different set of circumstances. And in this case, assuming the input costs hold, chasing that additional production would actually make you more profitable. So like anything else, it depends. So as we try and match production levels to the environment that we operate in, we're going to focus on milk. And in order to calculate that, we need to look at a few important dynamics that include the mature size of the cow herd existing, the current levels of milk production in that cow herd, the variability of feed and rainfall in that environment, and also your feed costs and pasture rents. And this can be somewhat technical and extraneous to calculate. If we focus on feed and rainfall variability, here's a picture of the mean annual rainfall map for the state of Hawaii. And we can see there are huge swings in rainfall within a county. In fact, probably greater than you'll see across the continent, with microclimates popping up seemingly every few miles. This is a huge range of production environments to operate in. All the more reason to try and accurately define how much milk our environment can support. Realizing that difficulty, we created a decision support tool to help you find the optimal level of milk production for your cow herd. So like I mentioned, milk production is part of it. We need to know the mature size of your cows. We're assuming a certain stocking rate. The feed costs and pasture rents all play into this. So does the feed and rainfall variability. And all of those things really have a huge impact on the amount of milk production you can support in your environment. And our goal is to try and target the optimum, not the maximum. Here are some outputs of our decision support tool related to the selection of Angus sires with optimal levels of milk EPDs to be used within several cow herds. Ranch 1 represents an operation with large 1,500 plus pound cows that has medium low milk production currently. They have very low feed costs. They have stable feed and rainfall per year. They fertilize their pastures with 150 pounds of urea per acre per year, and they're focused on producing a small number of cows, but they want those calves from those cows to be as elite as they can be. Not surprising, given that environment, they can support a milk EPD between 30 and 40 without much diminishing returns. Ranch 2 falls into a different category. They have small 1,175 pound cows with low inherent levels of milk production. They have relatively cheap feed costs and pasture rents. They have very stable feed and rainfall. This would be a similar environment to someone raising medium frame cows that had medium low milk production levels, medium feed costs with moderate feed and rainfall variability. Their optimum milk production is in the low 20s to mid 20s. Ranch 3 has 1,500 plus pound cows with medium milk production levels. They have relatively high feed costs, and they have extremely variable feed and rainfall from year to year. This is a typical feast or famine environment. Their cows and mature weights are near the upper end of what that environment can support already. So as you'd expect, sire selection would dictate a lower milk EPD to make cattle fit in that environment while maintaining mature size. In this case, a milk EPD between 5 and 10 would be optimal, with less milk having some diminishing returns, but any more milk resulting in a huge decline in profitability. In this example, the feed resources would not support the milk production of those cows, especially with that larger metabolic mature size. They would likely lose body weight and condition, and that would result in poor conception rates. Ranch 4 keeps medium-sized cows that are about 1,250 pounds. They have medium high levels of milk production. Their feed costs are slightly above average, and they have extremely variable rainfall. Their ideal milk EPD range is somewhere between the mid-teens to low 20s. And again, we're expressing this on the Angus milk EPD, and the milk EPD indicating not the pounds of milk per se, but the pounds of weaning weight attributed to milk production from that dam. So we have 4 herds with 4 different cow sizes and completely different production goals, each with different defined optimums for milk production in those scenarios. Well, that's an Angus. What about Hereford? What if you wanted to use Hereford sires in an attempt to make crossbred replacement females in those 4 operations? Here we have outputs of a decision support tool where we've converted the genetic outputs for milk production in Angus and aligned them to the current milk production levels available within the American Hereford Association's genetic evaluation. So we have the same colors representing the same ranches as in the previous slide, but now we've been able to refine our sire selection optimums to Hereford bulls that fit each of those ranches more appropriately for their goals. So really this is a powerful tool, especially for crossbreeding, where we can now harness the advantages of selection and mating systems to really maximize the benefit of complementarity and hybrid vigor for those purposes. While the tool is very powerful in terms of identifying um, targets for milk EPDs, milk levels within your production environment, it's actually not very user friendly. It's not ready for prime time. It's not an app you can download. So if you are interested in determining where your optimums might be for milk, please contact me and we'll work through these examples together. Tell me what you see and we'll try and come up with a case-by-case tailored solution to meet your needs. At the end of the day, the take-home message is pretty simple. If the current milking ability of your cow herd is too high, well, consider using one generation of sires that fall on the lower end of that optimal range. Then for the years to come, stay within that optimal range. On the other hand, if milk is currently too low to reap the rewards of what your environment can support, consider using a bull or bulls that fall on the higher end of that optimal range, and then stay within the optimal for years to come. And lastly, if milk production levels are just right, don't change them. Stay within the optimal milk EPD range for your operation. If it isn't broke, don't fix it. Here we have two cows to take a closer look at, the Angus on top and the Hereford on the bottom with her calf. Visual appraisal tells us right off the bat there's a lot to like. They're both long. In terms of structure, they're near ideal. Both cows have a near perfect set of feet and legs and udder structure. They're fairly problem-free, and as a result of being problem-free, they stick around. The point I'm trying to make is these are two beautiful females, but not all of your profitable cows may be as attractive on the profile as these two. Sometimes you need to learn to find the ones that make you money and then learn to like the way they look. Okay, but these are two examples of problem-free females that have obviously done very well in their environments. They've calved multiple times, they've bred back, they've remained productive. So lastly, how do you balance production levels to match your environment and management? We're not only talking about milk. Well, if we're selecting bulls, one of the easy things to do is choose a seed stock supplier that raises them in the same environment that you do. Sometimes that can be hard for us in the Pacific if we're trying to source bulls or semen from the US mainland. On the topic of sourcing semen from the mainland, consider that those glossy photographs in a sire directory or an advertisement may get you very excited. But when their calves come, that excitement might be short-lived. Ask yourself why they may not perform very well. Well, if you're using semen from a bull that was raised in the Dakotas with an abundance of feed, in terms of grass, it had a creep feeder in front of it, and really an easy life, you shouldn't be very surprised that that animal might struggle to deal with subtropical forage and the heat and humidity of most of our environments. There are a variety of selection tools available, including an animal's individual performance, EPDs and genomic profiles, selection indices that attempt to weight multiple traits with an economic value. But very many breeders have utilized old school approaches like independent culling levels, thereby setting a floor and a ceiling of tolerance for most traits, eliminating the ones that don't fit, or even a careful study of performance pedigrees have allowed for the propagation of livestock for hundreds of years. Visual appraisal is very important, and realize they have to be practical, they have to be sound from the ground up. An animal with the greatest genomics or individual performance may not be worth a whole lot if they can't walk. So you really have to put it all together in the big picture. Try and find animals that are problem-free with a balance of all traits. In addition to selection, proper utilization of mating systems such that straight breeding or crossbreeding can occur to maximize benefit And if you are talking about crossbreeding, choosing the right breeds to maximize complementarity, in addition to hybrid vigor, is of utmost importance. But lastly, I mean, if you're trying to select bulls, especially to produce females that will be retained in the herd, go ahead and select bulls from dams with a strong track record of success. If that bull is being produced from a dam that has produced calves for 10, 12, 15 plus years, that's a pretty good indication that there might be a variety of traits that contribute to longevity that bull may rank high for, transmitting to his own offspring. If you wonder how a bull may transmit other traits to its offspring, take a look at that bull's dam. Look at her udder structure, fore-udder attachment, rear-udder attachment, that medial ligament strength, the size of the tits. These are all important factors that are often overlooked in this day and age where data and technology seems to be king. On the other hand, if you're talking about heifer selection, follow the same path, but most oftentimes you are your own seed stock supplier. Choose heifers from dams with a strong track record of success. Find cows who repeatedly calve early. Find heifers produced from those cows and try and retain them. If you find a heifer that calved earlier in the season versus just a big heifer, well, you might be selecting for animals that more accurately fit your environmental constraints. And in the first place, the only way you can do this is if you keep records to know a cow's production history, so you can use that data for decision support. That's what it's all about. The same selection tools can be used for heifers, although we won't talk about EPDs very much with commercial heifer selection within a herd. Another tool is reproductive tract scoring, where you can palpate a yearling heifer and determine her level of reproductive development. This allows you to put a little extra pressure on selecting those earlier maturing females that are obviously in sync with the environment that they've been raised in. Crossbreeding and straight breeding can be used the same way to make advances, but in this case, crossbreeding may give you a little extra kick with hybrid vigor for those lowly heritable traits like fertility and longevity. Again, reach out, contact me, and hopefully we can work together and find a tailor-made solution for your own operation. In closing, there are a few strategies for success that I wanted to reiterate. Use a balanced approach to selection for multiple traits. Place the emphasis on the traits most important for that operation's goals, and by all means, avoid extremes. Don't chase unicorns. Probably more harm than good will come from it. And lastly, keep records so you can track and continue to make that progress. We're trying to find animals that fit the environment and improve our overall profitability. Well, how do we do that? We sometimes suffer from information overload, but if we keep it simple and really fuse common sense with all of the advances available in technology, we can probably improve production and definitely delve a little deeper to improve profit. Contact me if you have any questions, and I hope you're all having a productive day.